To everyone in the throne room, Danny Cole was invisible. That was exactly how he preferred it. He stood silently beside one of the towering crystal pillars, dressed in a flawless black security uniform. His boots gleamed beneath the palace lights, his breathing remained slow and steady, and not a single muscle had moved in the last 3 hours. To the nobles drifting through the royal court, he was little more than another human guard, a decoration posted in the corner and quickly forgotten. They couldn't have been more mistaken. The magnificent court of the Valanthi Empire flowed around him in a spectacle of wealth and power. Towering nobles nearly 8 feet tall crossed the polished crystal floor with effortless grace. Their silver skin shimmered beneath the pale glow of the palace ceiling, while molten gold eyes calmly judged everyone fortunate enough to stand before the throne. Kings bowed to emperors. Generals debated strategy. Diplomats traded carefully chosen lies beneath polite smiles. And through it all, no one paid the slightest attention to the quiet human standing against the wall, until the assassin struck. Then, in less than 5 seconds, every noble in the throne room would realize they had spent the entire afternoon ignoring the most dangerous person in the palace, and when they spoke, their voices carried a musical quality that made human speech sound rough and ugly in comparison. Danny was used to being ignored. He had been on Velenthor Prime for 6 months now, assigned as a diplomatic security officer to Princess Aindra as part of the new alliance between Earth and the Valanthi Empire. It was supposed to be an honor, the first human ever trusted with protecting a member of the royal family. In reality, it was a joke that everyone understood except the humans who had sent him. The Valanthi did not need human protection. They had ruled their corner of the galaxy for 10,000 years. Their warriors had crystalline bones that could stop a blade, and their bodies could heal from wounds that would kill most species. They lived for centuries, gathering wisdom and power that humans could only dream about. To them, Danny was not a guardian. He was a pet, a small, soft, fragile creature that the Empire had agreed to tolerate as a gesture of goodwill toward the newest members of the galactic community. Princess Aindra walked past him without a glance. She was beautiful in the way that all Valanthi were beautiful. With sharp features and flowing silver hair that moved like liquid metal, she wore robes of deep purple, the color of royalty, and a thin crown of crystal sat upon her head. She was young by Valanthi standards, only 200 years old, but she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had never been told no in her entire life. "The human is still here," she said to her handmaiden, not bothering to lower her voice. "Does he not grow tired of standing?" The handmaiden, a Valanthi woman named Serena, glanced at Danny with something that might have been pity. "He is dedicated to his duty, Your Highness, his duty." Aindra laughed, and the sound was like wind chimes in a storm. "What duty? What could that small creature possibly protect me from? A strong wind could break him in half. I have seen the reports on humans. They live for barely a century. Their bones are hollow sticks. They cannot survive in extreme temperatures. They need constant food and water and sleep." She shook her head slowly. "It is almost cruel to send such a fragile thing so far from its home." Danny heard every word. He kept his face blank and his eyes forward. He had learned long ago that reacting to insults only made things worse. The Valanthi did not mean to be cruel. They simply did not understand. To them, humans were like children playing at being adults. Amusing, perhaps, but not to be taken seriously. The throne room began to empty as the evening session came to an end. Nobles drifted away in small groups, their conversations mixing together into a soft hum of musical voices. Danny remained at his post until the princess retired to her private chambers. Then he followed at a respectful distance, always watching, always listening. He noticed things that the Valanthi guards did not: the servant who lingered too long near the princess's door, the noble who asked too many questions about the royal schedule, the slight change in the patrol patterns that left a gap in coverage near the eastern garden. Danny reported these observations to the head of the royal guard, a massive Volanth warrior named Commander Vorath, who listened with barely hidden amusement. "You worry too much, human," Vorath said, looking down at Danny from his great height. The princess is protected by the finest warriors in the empire. We have guarded the royal family for generations. Nothing can threaten her here. With respect, Commander, Danny replied, keeping his voice even. No security is perfect. There are always gaps, always weaknesses. Vorath's golden eyes narrowed slightly. Are you suggesting that Valanthy security is flawed? I am suggesting that every system can be improved. That is not an insult, it is simply the truth. For a moment, Danny thought the commander might strike him. Then Vorath laughed, a deep rumbling sound that echoed through the corridor. You have spirit, little human. I will give you that. But spirit does not stop assassins. Strength does. Speed does. Power does. He placed one massive hand on Danny's shoulder, and Danny felt the weight of it pressing down on him. You have none of these things. Go back to your post and try not to get in the way. Danny returned to his position outside the princess's chambers. He stood there through the night, watching the shadows move across the walls, listening to the distant sounds of the palace settling into sleep. He thought about Earth, about the blue skies and green forests he had left behind. He thought about his family, his mother, who had cried when he left, his father who had told him to make humanity proud. He wondered if he was making anyone proud. He wondered if anyone even noticed he was there. The next morning, Princess Aindra emerged from her chambers and walked past him without a word. She did not look at him. She did not acknowledge his presence. To her, he was invisible, just another piece of the background. But Danny kept watching. He kept listening. He kept noticing the small things that others missed, because that was what humans did. They paid attention. They learned. They adapted. They survived. And somewhere deep in his gut, Danny Cole had a feeling that his moment was coming. He did not know when. He did not know how, but he knew that one day the Volante would see what humans were really made of. He just hoped he would be ready when that day arrived. The Crimson Gala was the most important event of the Valanthy calendar. It celebrated the founding of the Empire 10,000 years ago, and every powerful family in the galaxy sent representatives to attend. The great hall of the palace was filled with over 1,000 guests, all dressed in their finest clothes, all competing to be noticed by the royal family. Danny stood near the eastern wall, dressed in his formal black uniform. He had been given a position far from the princess, tucked away in a corner where he would not embarrass the empire by being too visible. The Valanthy did not want their guests to think they needed human help with anything. He did not mind. The corner gave him a perfect view of the entire room. The hall was beautiful in a way that made Danny's chest ache. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting rainbow light across the marble floors. Long tables were covered with foods from 100 different worlds, and servants moved through the crowd carrying trays of drinks that glowed in colors Danny had no names for. Music played from somewhere he could not see. Soft and haunting and strange, Princess Aindra stood near the center of the room, surrounded by admirers. She wore a gown of deep red, the color of the gala, and her silver hair was arranged in an elaborate style that must have taken hours to create. She smiled and laughed and charmed everyone who approached her. Playing the role of the perfect princess with ease, the Valanthy royal guards were positioned throughout the hall, their armor gleaming under the lights. Commander Vorath stood near the emperor's throne, his eyes scanning the crowd with the alertness of a predator. He was confident. He was proud. He believed that nothing could go wrong. Danny believed differently. He had spent the past week studying the guest list, memorizing faces and names and backgrounds. He had walked through the hall a dozen times, noting every entrance and exit, every blind spot, every place where someone could hide. He had talked to the servants, the cooks, the cleaners, learning their routines and their habits. And now, as he watched the crowd move and shift like a living thing, he noticed something wrong. There was a server near the food tables who did not move like the others. He was Valanthy, tall and silver-skinned like all the rest, but his movements were too controlled, too precise. He carried a tray of drinks, but his eyes never looked at the tray. They kept drifting across the room, settling on one person, again and again. Princess Aindra. Danny felt his heart begin to beat faster. He pushed away from the wall and began to move through the crowd, keeping his eyes on the server. The man was getting closer to the princess, weaving between guests with practiced ease. His hand drifted to his side, touching something hidden beneath his formal robes. Danny moved faster. He pushed past a group of nobles who looked at him with shock and disgust. A human pushing through the crowd like he belonged there. How dare he? The server reached the edge of the group surrounding the princess. He set down his tray on a nearby table. His hands slipped inside his robes. Danny broke into a run. The server pulled out a plasma blade, a weapon so hot that it glowed white at the edge. It could cut through starship armor. It could cut through anything. He raised it high, his face twisted with hatred, and brought it down toward the princess's heart. Danny threw himself forward. He did not think about the consequences. He did not think about the pain. He did not think about anything except getting between that blade and its target. His body moved on instinct, on training, on something deeper than either of those things. The blade hit him in the chest. Danny felt the heat first, a burning sensation that spread through his entire body. Then he felt the blade punch through his skin, through his muscle, through his ribs. He felt it pierce his heart. He felt it exit through his back. The pain was beyond anything he had ever experienced. It was like being burned and frozen and torn apart all at the same time. His legs gave out beneath him, and he fell to the floor, his blood spreading across the white marble in a pool of deep red. The room erupted in chaos. Guards rushed forward, grabbing the assassin before he could strike again. Guests screamed and ran in all directions. Commander Vorath shouted orders, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade. Princess Indra stood frozen, staring down at the human who lay at her feet. His eyes were still open, but they were growing dim. His mouth moved, trying to form words, but no sound came out. Blood bubbled at his lips, and his chest rose and fell in short, desperate gasps. "He saved me," she whispered. "The human saved me." A physician pushed through the crowd and knelt beside Danny's body. He placed his hands on the wound and shook his head slowly. The blade went through his heart. "There is nothing I can do. No species can survive such a wound." Dai's eyes found Indra's face. He looked at her for a long moment, and something that might have been peace settled over his features. Then his chest stopped moving. His eyes went still. The light behind them faded away. The physician stood up and stepped back. "He is dead." The great hall fell silent. 1,000 guests stood motionless, staring at the small body on the floor. The human who had been ignored, mocked, and dismissed. The fragile creature who had given everything to save someone who had never even learned his name. Princess Indra knelt beside him, her beautiful gown soaking in his blood. She reached out and touched his face, feeling the warmth fade from his skin. "I never thanked him," she said softly. "I never even spoke to him." Commander Vorath stood over them, his face carved from stone. "He was a fool," he said. "He must have known he would die." "Yes," Indra replied, her voice barely a whisper. "He must have known." She looked at the human's face, at his closed eyes and peaceful expression, and she wondered what kind of creature would sacrifice itself for someone who had treated it like nothing. She wondered what humans were truly made of. She would find out soon enough. They brought Danny's body to the medical wing of the palace and placed it on a cold metal table. The room was filled with the soft hum of machines and the blue glow of diagnostic screens. Volant physicians moved around the body, taking readings and shaking their heads at what they found. The plasma blade had done its work perfectly. It had entered through the chest, burned through the heart, and exited through the back. The wound was clean and precise. There was no doubt about the cause of death. There was no possibility of survival. Word spread quickly through the palace. The human security officer had died protecting the princess. Some called him brave, others called him stupid. Most simply shrugged and went back to their lives. Humans died all the time. Their lives were short and fragile. This one had simply ended a little sooner than expected. Emperor Thalvorn came to the medical wing himself, walking slowly through the corridors with his personal guard at his sides. He was old, even by Valanthi standards, over 2,000 years, and his silver skin had faded to a pale gray, but his eyes were still sharp, and his mind was still keen. He stood beside the table and looked down at Danny's body with an expression of mild curiosity. A peculiar species, he said softly. They know they are weak. They know they cannot compete with us in strength or speed or longevity, and yet they throw themselves into danger without hesitation. He tilted his head slightly. Is it stupidity, I wonder, or something else entirely? Princess Aindra stood in the corner of the room, her arms wrapped around herself. She had changed out of her blood-soaked gown, but she could still feel the warmth of his blood on her hands. She could still see the look in his eyes as the light faded from them. He knew he would die, she said quietly. He had to know, and he did it anyway. Yes, the Emperor nodded slowly. That is what fascinates me. The Valanthi do not sacrifice themselves for strangers. We calculate risks. We weigh outcomes. We act in ways that serve our survival and the survival of our line. He reached out and touched Danny's cold hand. But humans seem to operate on a different principle. They act on instinct, on emotion, on something they call duty, Your Majesty. One of the physicians stepped forward, his golden eyes wide with confusion. There is something strange happening. The Emperor turned to look at him. Strange? What do you mean? The body. It is. The physician paused, searching for words. It is doing something. Everyone in the room turned to look at the table. For a long moment, nothing happened. Dai's body lay still and cold, exactly as it had been. Then one of his fingers twitched. It was a small movement, barely visible. It could have been a muscle spasm, a final firing of nerves in a dead body. But then it happened again and again. The chief physician rushed to the table and activated the diagnostic scanners. His hands were shaking as he read the results. This is impossible, he whispered. This is completely impossible. What is it? The Emperor demanded. His cells. They are repairing themselves. The damage to his heart. The burned tissue. It is healing slowly, but it is healing. The physician looked up with an expression of pure shock. His body is refusing to die. Princess Aindra moved closer to the table, her heart pounding in her chest. She watched as Danny's wound began to close, the edges of torn flesh knitting together with a web of red tissue. It was not fast, it was not clean, but it was happening. Danny's chest rose with a shallow breath. The room went completely silent, another breath deeper than the first. His color began to return, the gray fading from his skin. His eyelids fluttered, his lips parted, and then Danny Cole opened his eyes. He looked up at the ceiling for a long moment, blinking slowly as if trying to remember where he was. Then his gaze moved to the faces surrounding him. The Emperor with his ancient eyes, the physicians with their expressions of disbelief, the princess with tears streaming down her silver cheeks. Danny's voice came out rough and broken, like stones scraping together. Did we get him? No one answered. No one could find words. Danny tried to sit up and groaned in pain. His hand moved to his chest, touching the wound that was still healing. He looked down at it with a frown. That is going to leave a scar. You died. Princess Aindra's voice was barely a whisper. Your heart was destroyed. You were dead for almost an hour. Danny looked at her, and for the first time since he had arrived on Velenthor Prime, she truly saw him. Not as a pet, not as a joke, but as something she did not understand, something that frightened her and fascinated her in equal measure. Humans are hard to kill, Danny said simply. We do not give up easily. The Emperor stepped forward, his eyes burning with an intensity that made the air feel heavy. In 10,000 years of rule, the Valanth have encountered thousands of species. We have studied them all. We have catalogued their strengths and weaknesses. He leaned closer to Danny, his voice dropping to a near whisper. We have never, not once, encountered a species that could simply refuse to die. Danny met the Emperor's gaze without flinching. Then you have never truly known humans. The room remained silent as the impossible truth settled over everyone present. The fragile creature they had dismissed and ignored had done something that defied everything they knew about biology, about death, about the nature of life itself. He had died, and then he had chosen to come back. Princess Aindra reached out and took Danny's hand in her own. His skin was warm against her silver fingers. Warm and alive and impossible. What are you? She asked softly. Danny looked at her, and a small smile crossed his tired face. "I am human," he said, "and we are full of surprises." The news spread across the empire like fire through dry grass. A human had died and come back to life. A human had survived a wound that would have killed any other species in the known galaxy. Scientists, physicians, and scholars from a dozen worlds requested permission to come to Vanthor Prime and study the impossible creature. Danny submitted to their examinations with tired patience. He lay on tables while they scanned his body. He answered their questions while they took samples of his blood. He exercised on machines while they measured his heart rate and breathing. Day after day, week after week, they poked and prodded and tested him like a puzzle they were desperate to solve. The wound on his chest healed faster than anyone expected. Within 2 weeks, the hole that had gone straight through his heart was nothing but a thick ridge of scar tissue. It was ugly and red and would never fully fade, but it was healed completely and totally healed. "This should not be possible," said Dr. Vathan, the chief scientist leading the research team. She was an older Valanthe woman with silver hair that had turned white at the temples. She had spent 300 years studying alien biology, and she had never seen anything like this. The human heart is a simple organ, 4 chambers, basic structure, primitive compared to most species. When it is destroyed, the human should die. That is the end. "And yet here I am," Danny said, sitting on the edge of the examination table. He was tired of being studied. He wanted to go back to his duties, but the Emperor had ordered a complete investigation, and no one disobeyed the Emperor. Dr. Vathan pulled up a holographic display showing the structure of Danny's cells. "We have discovered something remarkable," she said. "Human cells have an unusual property. When damaged, they do not simply die. They send signals to other cells calling for help. Your body floods the damaged area with repair mechanisms, with new cells, with something you call stem cells that can become any type of tissue needed. I know how healing works," Danny said. "All humans heal." "Yes, but you do not understand." Dr. Vathan leaned forward, her golden eyes bright with excitement. "Most species heal slowly. Damage accumulates over time. Eventually, the body cannot keep up and death follows. But humans heal aggressively, persistently. Your bodies are constantly at war with death, and they refuse to surrender." She changed the display to show brain scans taken during Danny's recovery. "And there is more. When you were dying, your brain released massive amounts of chemicals, adrenaline, endorphins, cortisol. These chemicals pushed your body beyond its normal limits. They kept your cells working even when they should have shut down. They gave your repair systems time to work." Danny thought about this for a moment. "So, my brain refused to let me die. In a sense, yes. Your species has evolved a remarkable survival mechanism. When faced with death, your minds enter a state of extreme focus and determination. You call it willpower, we call it terrifying." The door to the laboratory opened, and Princess Aindra walked in. She had been visiting Danny every day since his resurrection, at first out of guilt, then out of curiosity, and now out of something she was not ready to name. She nodded to Dr. Vathan and moved to stand beside Danny. "How is the patient today?" she asked. "Frustrating," Dr. Vathan replied. "Every time I think I understand humans, I discover something new that changes everything." Aindra smiled slightly. "I know the feeling." Danny looked at her and something warm spread through his chest. She had changed since the night of the assassination. The arrogance was still there, buried deep in her royal bones, but it was softer now, tempered by something new. The doctor was explaining why I did not stay dead. Danny said, "And what did she conclude, doctor?" Vathan sighed heavily. "I concluded that humans are not weak at all. They are simply built differently than other species. The Volante evolved to be strong, to resist damage in the first place. Humans evolved to survive damage after it happens. They are not warriors, they are survivors. There is a saying on Earth," Danny said quietly. "What does not kill me makes me stronger." Alindra frowned. "That makes no sense. Damage is damage. It weakens the body, not for humans." Danny lifted his shirt and showed her the scar on his chest. "This scar is proof that I faced death and won. Every human carries scars like this. Every human has stories of things that tried to kill them and failed. We do not avoid danger because we cannot. So instead, we learn to survive it. Dr. Vethan nodded slowly. Human history supports this. Their homeworld tried to kill them constantly. Ice ages, plagues, predators, natural disasters. They survived all of it, not by being the strongest or fastest, but by refusing to give up, by adapting, by getting back up every time they were knocked down. Indra was quiet for a long moment, thinking about everything she had learned. She had been raised to believe that the Valanthi were the greatest species in the galaxy, the strongest, the wisest, the most enduring. But now she wondered if they had been measuring greatness wrong all along. "You threw yourself in front of that blade, knowing you would die," she said to Danny. "Why?" Danny looked at her with those strange human eyes, so small and dark compared to Valanthi eyes, but burning with something she could not name. "Because protecting you was more important than surviving. Because some things are worth dying for, but you did not know you would come back." "No," Danny admitted. "I thought I was dead. I accepted it." He smiled slightly. "But I hoped. Humans always hope, even when there is no reason to. Even when logic says we should give up, we hope, and we fight, and sometimes we win." Alindra reached out and touched the scar on his chest, feeling the rough tissue beneath her fingers. It was warm, alive, impossible. "You are a strange species, Danny Cole," she said softly. "Yes," he agreed. "We are." And for the first time since he had arrived on Velenthor Prime, Danny did not feel like a joke, or a pet, or a curiosity. He felt like something more, something that mattered, something that the galaxy had never seen before. 6 weeks after he died, Danny Cole walked into the throne room of the Valanthi Empire as a changed man. His chest still ached sometimes, especially in the mornings when the cold air made his scar tissue tight. But he walked straight and tall, his black uniform pressed clean, his boots polished bright. The throne room was different this time. Before he had stood in the corners like a shadow, ignored and forgotten. Now the entire court had gathered to see him. Over 500 Valthi nobles lined the walls, their golden eyes watching him with expressions that ranged from curiosity to fear to something that might have been respect. Emperor Thalorn sat upon his crystal throne, dressed in robes of deep purple and gold. His ancient face was calm, but there was something new in his eyes, a recognition that had not been there before. Princess Indra stood at her father's right hand, wearing a gown of silver that matched her skin. She watched Danny approach with a small smile on her lips. They had spent many hours together during his recovery, talking about their worlds, their lives, their hopes for the future. She had learned that humans were not simple creatures after all. They were complex and contradictory, capable of great cruelty and great kindness, terrible weakness and incredible strength. Danny stopped at the foot of the throne and bowed his head. The silence in the room was heavy, pressing down on everyone present. Emperor Thalvorn rose from his seat, and the entire court held its breath. The emperor had not stood for a visitor in over a century. It was a mark of supreme respect, given only to those who had proven themselves worthy of the empire's attention. "Danny Cole of Earth," the emperor said, his voice carrying through the great hall. "You came to us as a servant, a guardian assigned to my daughter as part of a treaty we considered beneath our dignity. We looked at you and saw weakness. We looked at your species and saw children playing at greatness." He paused, and his golden eyes locked onto Danny's face. "We were wrong." A murmur ran through the crowd. The emperor admitting error was unheard of. It simply did not happen. The Valanthi did not make mistakes, and they certainly did not confess them in public. "You took a blade through your heart to save my daughter's life," the emperor continued. "You died on our floor, your blood staining our stone. And then you did something that no one in this empire believed possible. You refused to accept death. You fought against the darkness and clawed your way back to life through sheer force of will." The emperor descended the steps of his throne, moving slowly, until he stood face to face with Danny. They were different in every way. The emperor was tall and silver, ancient and powerful. Danny was small and pale, young and fragile. But in that moment, they looked at each other as equals. "We studied your species," the emperor said quietly. "We learned things that humbled us. Humans are not strong the way we are strong. You cannot lift great weights or survive in the vacuum of space. Your lives are short, your body's fragile, your technology primitive." He placed his hand on Dai's shoulder, and his grip was surprisingly gentle. "But you have something we do not, something we never understood until now." "What is that?" Danny asked. "You have the will to endure," the emperor replied. "Your species was forged in fire. Your ancestors faced extinction again and again, and every time they refused to die, that stubbornness, that refusal to surrender, is written into every cell of your body. It is what brought you back from death. It is what makes humans truly dangerous." He stepped back and addressed the entire court, his voice rising to fill the hall. "Let it be known throughout the empire that humanity is not beneath us. They are different from us in ways we are only beginning to understand. Their bodies are soft, but their spirits are iron. Their lives are short, but they burn bright. They are not children, they are survivors, and they have earned our respect." The court remained silent, absorbing the emperor's words. Then, one by one, the nobles began to bow their heads. First the ones nearest the throne, then those further back, then the guards along the walls. 500 Valanthi. Bowing to a single human, Danny felt his throat tighten. He had never expected this. He had only done his job. He had only tried to protect someone who needed protecting. Princess Aindra stepped forward, breaking protocol in a way that made the older nobles gasp. She walked down the steps of the throne and stood before Danny, her silver skin glowing under the lights. "You saved my life," she said softly, "and you taught me something important. Strength is not about power. It is about what you are willing to sacrifice for the things you believe in." She reached out and took his hand, her cool fingers wrapping around his warm ones. The court erupted in whispers, a princess holding hands with a human. It was unthinkable. It was scandalous. It was wonderful. "I was cruel to you," Aindra continued. "I dismissed you, and mocked you, and treated you like you were nothing. I was wrong, and I am sorry." Danny smiled, and his eyes were bright with something that might have been tears. "You do not need to apologize. You did not know." "No," she agreed, "but I know now, and I promise you, Danny Cole, that I will never forget what you taught me, what your people taught all of us." She turned to face the court, still holding Danny's hand. "Let it be known that humanity stands not beneath the empire, but beside it, not as servants, but as allies, not as curiosities, but as friends." Her voice grew stronger, filled with conviction, and perhaps in time as something more. The court fell silent again. But this time, the silence was different. It was not shock or disbelief. It was acceptance, understanding, the beginning of something new. Danny looked at Aindra, at her silver skin and golden eyes and fierce spirit, and he felt hope bloom in his chest. Hope for the future, hope for humanity, hope for whatever came next. Outside the palace walls, news of the ceremony spread across the empire. Ships carried the story to distant worlds. Transmissions beamed it across the void of space. And everywhere it went, a new phrase began to appear in conversations and reports, and whispered discussions. "Never count a human out. They always get back up." It became a warning, a promise, a truth that the galaxy would never forget. And somewhere in the throne room of the Valanthi Empire, a small, fragile human held a princess's hand and smiled. He had come to this world as a joke. He would leave it as a legend. That was what humans did. They surprised you every single